Hello, welcome everybody to today's webinar. I'm just going to give folks like 30 more seconds to come in and then we'll go ahead and get started. So bear with us. I think I'll get started. Again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kathy Madison. I am a consultant and also business development and also CIDM member liaison here at both Comtech and CIDM. And we are one and the same, and we're sponsoring this webinar today. If you're not familiar with us, the Comtech, well, even if you are familiar with us, Comtech is our consulting arm, and we've been in business since 1978, and we help clients create better content, whether that's creating a content strategy for them, doing an information model, helping them with their taxonomy to improve search capabilities, maybe assessing their processes, doing benchmark studies for them, and even, of course, doing data implementation, style sheet constraints, schematron, that sort of thing. And everything that we consult about, we also have training classes on, and currently right now, those are all online. We're really excited to get back into in-person classes, but for the remainder of 2021, they will be online. And that's on the Comtech side. On the CIDM side, that's our member organization, where the information development managers typically get together to discuss issues and work on finding improvements. They do that through networking opportunities like a monthly roundtable discussion, a dedicated Slack channel, and of course, face-to-face conferences when we can, and online ones as well. We also have a best practices newsletter. So if you're interested in becoming a member, you certainly could let me know. So on the workshop side, just giving a little heads up of some things coming later in the year, that again, these will all be online. If you're here to learn about content as an asset and you're probably most interested in things like minimalism and editing essentials, those probably maybe the ones that would be closest to what you may have interest in, or maybe even developing a content strategy. So those are the Comtech workshops. We also just announced our keynote and facilitator for the Best Practices Conference, and that's the conference geared toward the managers of the information development team. And we're pleased to have Helena Segarra here, and she's going to be doing very interactive sessions all about improving your productivity. And I just love the name of her book, in the Efficiency Assassin. I love that, getting rid of that. And if you are not a CIDM member, you want to take advantage of early registration discount, which ends on July 4th. If you are a CIDM member, you obviously either get a free pass to this conference and or a significant discount on it. And we are pleased that Etteplan / Hyper STE is going to be one of our sponsors at that conference. So Barry, our speaker today, will be there as well. So upcoming webinars, we have 2 more scheduled for June. You could always check out the upcoming webinars tab of the CIDM website. And more importantly, you can get informed by getting on our mailing list. You could subscribe to our newsletters, or you could subscribe to Just Getting Events, or you could just subscribe to all communications. You got some options there. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and on Twitter. So that's all I had for our introduction. Just remind everybody, we are recording this session, and we'll get that link out to you sometime next week. And we encourage you to use the questions dialogues for questions and the chat dialogue for comments that you may have for Barry. He is willing to be interrupted, so if you do have questions, we'll try to field those as he goes instead of waiting to the end. His presentation won't take the whole hour, but he's available for the full hour and a half. If you have questions for him, take advantage of having him here as a resource. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Barry.
Thank you, Kathy.
I'm sharing my screen.
Let me share my screen. Let me know once you have a visual.
We've got it.
All right. How about now? Still?
Yep.
Very
Perfect.
good.
All right.
All right, everyone. So welcome to today's webinar. Content is a business asset, which we're doing together, hosted here by Kathy and CIDM. I'll skip this since she already mentioned my name, other than maybe mentioning that I've been in the tech documentation industry now for over 20 years, since February. So it's been a while. Obviously, also a CIDM member for that matter. Also since back in the early 2000s, I think was one of the first conferences that I attended. So it's been a great ride. About today's topic, content is a business asset. What we're trying to achieve with that is basically talking to you a little bit about the importance of content, and then it actually needs to really be seen as a business asset, not just a way of complying with standards or with regulatory affairs or with legislation, as far as we have a product and we put that on the global market, and the European or US or other international legislation requires us to have documentation or help or some kind of an information set to come with that product to explain how to install it or how to maintain it or how to troubleshoot. Content it needs to be seen as something that is much bigger than that. There has actually been some surveys quite recently. CIDM did a great survey that I'll talk about in a moment, but PwC here also did one where a lot of companies worldwide have, partly also because of the pandemic, have accelerated their digital transformation efforts. So meaning that content is going to go digital as it has been in the past, but now even more so in the future. Because people want to work from home is one thing, but also making content digitally available is also a much more cost-effective way, and also making your content more future-proof. So Kathy and her team have great ways of helping you there with regards to, for instance, the use of data, which is also part of a content strategy, which is part of that digitization effort. But in this webinar, we'll discuss the key role that content has in the field of this digitalization trend, and what you should do to future-proof your content while elevating your customer experience. So why is content then a business asset? If we look at the macro trends, for instance, they accelerate the need for good quality content. Globalization, your products are going global, need to meet global standards. The people that you have on board. Okay, if you have a team of technical writers, or if you have outsourced your technical writing, then you need to make sure that all your writers are aligned, that they create the same type of content and the same type of quality content, right? It's not just as easy as providing them with, let's say, the Microsoft style guide and saying, here you go, and now you're good to go, because how do you enforce that style guide? There's also some choices that you have to make within that style guide, because, for instance, another one would be the Chicago Manual of Style. Well, that's like a very big book, which gives you a lot of choices on how to write and which choices do you make. So it's not that easy to standardize on that, if you will. You want to open markets quickly. Good content will help you achieve that. Simple example, if you buy a television and it comes with a manual, and that manual is not good, then that actually is going to negatively influence the way you look at that TV brand that you purchased. If you look at it from an industrial perspective, you have to maintain a very large piece of equipment, and the information that came with it is not very good, or inconsistent, or missing altogether. Then it's again going to badly reflect on your product. I have now just moved into a new home about 3 weeks ago, as I migrated from the Netherlands back here to the States. So I'm back in Texas now. You could maybe see that on this little symbol here, which is Texas Tech University here in Lubbock, Texas. So I basically there was a lot of furniture coming in. There was a lot of household appliances coming in, and some of them, or actually a lot of them, needed to be assembled. The manuals that came with them were astounding. They were either missing information, or it was bad English, or the English was good, but it was still ambiguous on what I needed to do. Now, of course, I'm in the tech pop industry for over 20 years. So I'm a little bit biased, but nonetheless, it tells you that a lot of this information is still not where it needs to be. There's other products, like for instance, some of the TVs that do not come with the manuals actually inside the TV itself. So there are some of these manufacturers actually have taken really big steps. You know, you set the TV up, you start it, it's going to ask you which language do you want this, which region are you in, and then being able to customize their installation information for you at hand. But good content, in essence, will help you open up markets, new markets quickly by being able to showcase that you have industry credibility, that you meet certain standards, whether they are local or international. By elevating your customer experience with good content, you ensure that your product comes across as a great product, because the content that came with it was also excellent. So future-proof your content by being able to go to creating micro content, and that has to do with not just searchability and findability, but also understandability. Being able to connect your content so that you can, you know, with smart fridges, for instance, or smart household equipment, where it's in the end going to be able to connect to IoT, so Internet of Things, being able to connect to augmented reality, all of these different types of future trends that are happening. Content, if it has the right metadata, if it's set up the right way, using data, using simplified English and other standards, you're going to make your content not just cost effective, but also future proof. So content actually impacts your business. So what does then poor content do? Well, I already mentioned it can give you poor customer experience, which negatively affects your branding. There are a lot of examples of human errors and risks because of ambiguous content. So specifically, if you're in the heavy equipment industry, and this one sentence stated, it had to do something with engines, but make sure engines are in the off position. Then it was not clear if it was just, make sure that the engines are in the off position. It was not clear whether it needed to be just one engine or all four engines, and that can of course create a massive risk there. Just a simple sentence, short sentence, can create so much ambiguity and problems. If you're not going to have good content, then and it's going to be ambiguous, you can't really expect that content to be correctly translated in other languages, because if the source was ambiguous, you can bet on it that the target language is also going to be ambiguous. And now you're going to have not a problem in the English language, but in all the other languages that you have to translate to. Your hidden costs, like support costs, for instance, if you don't understand the manual, how many times are people going to call you? Because they have questions about it. Again, negatively affecting your brand, but also increasing your cost, which you not necessarily can see at first. Low quality and consistency of content across your global workforce, international customer base. Again, if you do not align your global team of writers with the same content goals, then you're going to get a lot of inconsistencies, and what was written by one person will look completely different if it was written by another person. So not complying with regulatory and contractual requirements. We deal a lot with aerospace and defense companies, and there's of course a lot of contractual requirements there. But also meeting local, if you're going to export your product to somewhere locally in Asia, for instance, or Asian customers export their products to Europe, specifically China and India, then they also need to make sure that their content meets certain requirements. Bad content can lead you to not being able to publish timely, up-to-date, and cost-effective content as a result as well. We've had one customer that that has to go through various review processes. They're an aerospace manufacturer, and if the content wasn't correct, they had to go through a new review process, and that led, I think, one review process costed them $10,000. And so, by the end of the year, they had a big bill because content wasn't aligned, wasn't standardized in the first place, so that they would be able to prevent these reviews from happening in the first place. Now, CIDM also did a great survey that I always like to refer to. This was back in March in their newsletter, and which talks about what content quality is. So what is the definition then of content? And this question was asked to their members in the member survey. Over 40 companies participated, and you can see on the right-hand side here that accuracy is an important one, clarity, relevant, content that is usable, consistent, that has proper grammar, spelling, punctuation, that is concise, so short and to the point, that has a good level of detail, that deals with voice and tone and word choice, and also with look and feel. And then on the right-hand side, we see how companies, at least according to their own opinion, were doing in that regard. And you can see that some of these, like relevance and usability and consistency and being concise, they weren't doing good at all. So one is we're doing great, and 9 or 10 is that we're not doing good at all. You can see that even though they you know, how the way they were looking at content quality, what does it need to be, versus how we're actually doing against it, we're giving completely different results there. In mentioning here that what do we then do about it, right? Well, we can buy tools and that can solve the problem. Sure, business impacts, that matters. 91% of the people in the survey think that tools will improve content quality. Great. But it's not just about tooling, of course. It's tooling itself is not the end goal. You can buy the best content management system in the world, but if you do not have your processes in place, if people have not been trained, if you don't have a content strategy in place where CIDM actually can help you out with that as well, then you're going to end up where you started. So tooling is essential, but it's not the end goal. But it's part of a very important number of steps that you need to take to make the implementation successful. So define your business goals. If you want to save translation costs, then you need to know what your translation costs are now. It's a little bit different with the hidden support costs because they're hidden for a reason, right? So it's a bit different to say how much support calls or is it costing us, but you can of course look at how many support calls do we get, and then look afterwards, how many support calls are we getting now after we have done this. Set your KPIs, your key performance indicators. So look at the cost, look at the effectiveness, look at the time that is needed to write and understand content, and those sorts of things. It's something that we can help you with, by the way. Content quality, what does that mean? Well, you need to standardize on your terms and writing rules. There are style guides in place, but you need to define them further where needed. So just by having a list of IEEE terms or aerospace and defense terms is not going to get you there, because again, they're all going to be a list of terms. And guess what? They're going to have words in them that have the same meaning. So you're going to have like 10 words that could have the same meaning. For instance, make sure, be sure, ensure, validate, verify, inspect, examine. 7 words, pretty much all of them have the same meaning. And if they're being used inconsistently, then you're going to potentially cause confusion with your end users. But you know, 7 different words require 7 different translations, believe it or not, and you're going to get charged for that. So standardizing means that 1 word can only have 1 meaning, and it also means that the writing rules should be aimed at creating that form of clarity. For instance, it's best to use articles in front of nouns because nouns are often being used as verbs. And by having an article in front of it, people will recognize it as a noun. Switch, for instance, for example, can be used both as a verb as well as a noun. So if you're going to say, talk to someone about a switch, now we know it's a switch that we're talking about instead of telling them to switch something on or off. Another problem, for instance, is, well, same with the word switch, right? If you say you need to switch the light off, and I'm going to go to the switch and there's actually no switch, there's a button there that I need to turn, then what am I going to do? Is that Same way, if you say, turn the light off, and I'm now going to go and there's a switch. I can't turn anything. You're going to actually have end users, believe it or not, that are going to take you very, very literally. And if you tell them to turn something, they're going to look for something to turn. And if they can't find it, then they won't turn it on or off. And that can be that can have a dangerous consequences, of course, depending on the type of product that you have. Training is important because people need to know. If you give them a style guide, you need to train them on how to use it. What we actually do, and I'll talk a little bit more about training in a moment, but training is good specifically when you explain people how some of these writing rules work, what they are trying to achieve. Why would I need to use an article in front of a noun, for instance? But it also helps people to stick with the need to know and not so much with the nice to know. That actually alone has, and we've trained over 3,000 people, I'd say right now about 3,200. The biggest benefit that we see from our customers coming back to us by setting these KPIs is that they were able to sometimes reduce their content by up to 40%. Because they are simply sticking with the need to know. When you write information, we always ask our writers, does the end user really need to know all of this? And how would we be able to shorten this and just, basically be able to stick to the point? And every time, sometimes it's 20% less, but we've seen cases where it's 40% less words that are needed. That means 40% less to translate. That also means that your end users are much happier because the content gets straight to the point. You don't have to read a lot of information, 40% less printing cost, etc., etc. And then the last but not least is to create awareness amongst those affected. If you're going to have a style guide, if you're going to have standards like simplified English in place, then you need to make sure that everyone in the organization that's going to get affected by this new way of writing is at least aware of this. Because a lot of times you have these review processes where the SMEs, the subject matter experts or engineers, are somewhat involved in creating content. That then goes to the writers. They have to make sense of it. And then it goes back to the engineers. And then they're like, well, hang on a second. That's not what I was trying to say, or that's not how we call it. Well, why would you not call it that way? Well, we've always called it this particular term. Well, that's not a good reason why you should continue to call it that way, by the way. So create awareness. We did a training at a large train manufacturer in Canada, and the first few hours of the training session was by inviting all the engineers and the subject matter experts, and then by telling them what we were trying to achieve here, so that they would know that if they write something like a turret dome chassis window securing screw threaded hole, which is a noun, not everyone was able to understand that word, even though it made complete sense to them, and that's usually half of the battle. You can avoid a lot of discussions from happening in that review process. What to look for in tooling, what to look for in general if you're looking for content quality, right? What are the pain points that you're trying to solve? We kind of defined three by talking to a lot of our customers. One, is it that you're trying to comply with an aerospace or defense specification like S1000D or Simplified Technical English, or ATA 2200? Sure. Are you trying to comply with style guides? Is that your goal? Microsoft Manual of Style, Chicago Manual of Style. There's different ones around. Simplified English is also a style guide to some extent. Is it compliance that you're looking for? Is it that you are looking to improve the content quality, saving cost, having one voice towards your customers, align your global writers, improve clarity, reduce ambiguity? Are you looking more at KPIs like that? Or is it that you're trying to replace an existing solution that you already have in place with a better one that's also specifically more cost effective? There's a number of checker tools out there. We have one called Hyper STE, but there's a few others out there. And some of them have a lot of bells and whistles. Some of them are quite costly. What problems are you trying to solve? What is your cost against it? And is there an actual business case? So what is the return on investment for that? So we had some customers also come to us because they were looking for a tool that could do something similar than the one that they have, and it would actually be more cost effective. So quality starts at the source, right? So we've have customers who sometimes get their content because their headquarters are, for instance, in Japan. They would have that content come over to the States. They would then have to translate the Japanese to English, standardize that, and then translate to other languages. Where, of course, if you really want to do it the right way, the source content should be immediately in English. At Etteplan, we have close to 3,500 people, but 600 of us are in technical documentation, and the majority of those are technical writers. We have offices in Sweden, in Finland, in Poland, Germany, the Netherlands, here in the States, then, and in China as well. And we have all of our writers write immediately in the source language in English. Even in China, they don't write in Chinese, they write immediately in English, and they write in simplified English. So that if they have that content, it needs to, number one, it's standardized immediately from the get-go. You don't have standards for Chinese or German or French or any of the other countries that we're in, but you do have it for English. So we standardize it for the English language, and then we translate to sometimes 50 languages for our customers. And that saves our customers quite a bit of money. So quality starts at the source. Now with HyperST, we have a tool that's embedded immediately directly into your authoring system. It checks for compliance against these style guides. It finds these problems. It does the checking right into your authoring environment. You can create reports. It aligns your team, regardless whether they are located. So they could be working from home. They could be working in other countries. It's all facilitated. And with that, we've been able to achieve some great results. So 40% improvement in review process, 60% reduction in overall content development processes, 30% in translation localization savings, and then up to 40%, as I mentioned earlier, in reduced word count. So these are some of the pain points that we're trying to solve here. So we can help you reduce the risk, automate compliance, expedite efficiencies, right? So where are you going to get your efficiencies from? What are they going to be? Elevate your customer experience, accelerate time to market, and then eliminate friction as well. And you can see how all of these other subheadings here could potentially help you with your specific needs. One of the last things I want to mention here before we open the Q&A session is that, so I mentioned already that we have trained over the past, we've trained currently over 3,200 people. We would normally do that as an on-site training, as you can see right here. Those would be taking 2 days on site. So these are companies that would use HyperSTE or not use HyperSTE and still require training. So we can usually do it as part of an implementation, but it can also be done separately. Now this was of course pre-COVID. So since last year, we were already doing online workshops anyway, but we've gone fully online with our workshops. That may take about 9 hours or so, and we would do that in increments of 3 hours just to make sure that the writers in India and the writers in Europe and the writers in North America would all be able to join these sessions at the same time. And those have been working really, really well. Now, what I'm also here to give you the news update today is to let you know that as of probably by the end of June, we will be releasing an e-learning course. And we'll be the first ones to do this in the world. That is going to be an e-learning course on not technical writing, but simplified English, like content quality technical writing. It's about a 6-hour course. It includes exercises. Pricing starts at 650 euros or 750 if I know the dollar rate exchange rate here. per individual. And if you need your groups to be trained, then you can inquire with me, and we can give you probably a bit of a discount there, because then we look at not just one person, but the whole group, depending on how many people you need to get trained. They can then learn ST in their own time, which is a great thing. You have a couple of months to complete the course actually with the exercises, and it's also nice because you can then show your manager, or if you are a freelancer, you can show that you have gone through this type of accreditation, and you're able to as a manager to see how writers are doing, how they did with the exercises, how they did with all the writing rules. So now this is something you can do through our learning management system, but this is also something that you can purchase as a whole and then basically import it and use it within your own LMS. So so that's something new that I wanted to share with you today. And we actually having some high expectations of this because a lot of people are working from home, because a lot of individuals have never really been able to go through a simplified English training, because they're normally done as groups and therefore they're too expensive, or they will not be eligible to do this. And we're hoping to help out those people here with this as well, in addition to larger organizations, of course. So that being said, Kathy, I'll open up the room for questions, or if you're interested in a free trial, here's my contact information, barry.braster@etteplan.com. The number here in the States, 806-500-9262. Yeah, any questions? How can I help?
All right, folks, again, use the questions, the Q&A box if you've got questions. And of course, you could also follow up on the chat. So I have a question. I'll kick it off here. So you said that you had 40% improvement on the review process.
Yeah.
How did they measure that? And also, did you see a trend in them reducing the size of their editorial staff because they were using a tool like STE?
Yes, well, it depends on how you're using your editorial staff, of course, but we have one aerospace manufacturer that's been using the tool, I would say, for almost 15 years now. They were able to reduce like they had 3 people doing the editorial work for them. And because HyperST automated a lot of this checking process by being able to create reports on a whole set of documents, instead of them being able to take their style guide on one hand and then get the content and then just basically doing these what do you call them? They would take these examples out of them, these snapshots, and doing checks like that. Because HyperST automated a lot of that, they were able to take 2 out of the 3 people and have them become technical writers rather than being involved in the review process. The other question, as far as the 40%, how that was measured, it was mainly measured in time. How much time does it take for a product to get released, and how much of that time is in technical writing versus the release of a document, right? So that's something that was measured. Then there's review processes involved there as well. So we simply were able to look at the time. There was less discussions. That was one thing that came out of it. And the review process took 40% less because there were less discussions. Everyone was, and this is why the awareness, creating awareness is such a big deal. It's not just about having a tool in place. It's about training people that are involved in this review process, because we've seen customers that said, no, we want to just train our writers and we're good to go. Well, did you tell the people upstairs about this effort? Because they're going to come back to you with questions. And so in the beginning, you're going to have to explain yourself even more rather than believing that it's now all hinky-dory, right? So, and that has to do, like, because these writers, with a standard like simplified English, for instance, you're being forced to create clarity. You can't go one way or the other. You cannot be vague about it. HyperST will also do that. It will say, well, what do you say? What are you trying to say here? Is it A or B? Well, it could be both. Well, then you should tell people that it could be both and not being vague about it. So, because that's going to go upstairs to the reviewer and he's going to say, Yeah, but that's not what I was trying to say. Well, then what were you trying to say? So those are types of discussion. Creating that type of awareness is going to usually be already saving half the battle.
Okay. Related to this whole thing about the simplified technical English, I've always wondered about, it defines the words you should use, but what about the actual localization of your content? For instance, I was just listening to the convex localization panel talk, and Depot from, I think it was GE Healthcare, mentioned that the color red is happy in Chinese. I mean, it means good luck. It's happy. It's something good. But in the rest of the world, we typically associate the color red with cautions and warnings, and this is bad. So does HyperSTE do anything about that type of localization, or is it only paying attention to the word choices?
Well, if you're talking about words, you can define your words in your dictionary. So this is something that we help our customers with. So we can ask those questions, like if you want to use the word red, what market are you going to go to? Do you want to approve that word for China? And do you want to not approve that word for other countries? That's possible. You can have not just one dictionary, you can have multiple dictionaries that can sit on top of each other, that can override one another. So you can have, let's say, a China dictionary that still have English words in them, but they would be, let's say, localized and be approved if you are writing for China. So that's possible. Funny example, now that you mentioned the color red, is my colleague was in Japan a couple of years ago, and he was trying to get a taxi to go for dinner or something. And he looked outside, and there was a bunch of taxis in. Probably he was in Tokyo, and they were all having the symbol on top of the cab was colored red, every single one of them. And he was thinking to himself, well, that means that it's not available, right? The cab is not available. But he looked inside the cabs or the taxis. I'm being ambiguous here. I'm using two words with the same meaning. And there was no one in there. So he thought, well, maybe they're on their way to an appointment. And then he was finally saw one that was green. And then so he held it over, and they just kept on going, and they had someone inside. Well, he was finally able to get hold of a taxi driver, asking him, what is the story with this? He said, well, actually red means that it's available, because red means that it's bad news for the driver, so not for the person that's supposed to. So in other words, who is your end user that you are writing for, right? So, and in this case, the taxi driver did that for himself rather than for the customer.
Right.
So it was clear to him, but it's not about him, right? It's about the customer. And in this case, the customer was someone who was trying to hail a taxi and was unsuccessful. So
That's a great example. That's good. So related to being able to choose the colors and things like that in your different dictionaries, I assume you could also do that with words like color that are spelled differently.
yeah, English versus so British, like the Merriam-Webster versus the Oxford Dictionary. That's something you can do. Yeah.
Okay, good. So there's a question from Tracy. How does employing a tool like HyperSTE make your content a business asset?
By making your content better, by making it consistent throughout your global workforce, it is going to it's going to, in the end, because the content is written for a purpose, right? And the purpose is to inform your end user, your customers. By making content more of a, and content has become much more of a bigger part of the product now than it was, for instance, a couple of decades ago, where you had these old manuals that were just sitting in the factory collecting dust, basically, where now it's integrated into the product itself. It's integrated into your television, it's integrated into your smartphone, it's integrating into your household equipment, and so it becomes a much bigger part of it. Now, in the world of risk, where you also want to mitigate risk, content also plays a very important part. One tiny little error in your content can have disastrous consequences if you're in the medical industry, or if you're in the airline industry, or if you are in the heavy equipment industry, but also in the software world, it can have big consequences because it could damage your product if people are not necessarily following the rules or following the information, the instructions correctly. So because of these consequences, either in elevating the customer experience with great content, or by mitigating the risks and the safety hazards, also because of great content, that will actually turn your content into a business asset. And HyperST is just a tool to help you get there, together with training, together with using style guides and standardizing your terms to make that happen.
Yeah, I think that person actually came in just a tad late, maybe, because I think you did a good job explaining that at the very beginning, I thought.
Well, there's a recording available, right? I think there was a question on that as well. So
yeah.
And I can provide the slides as well to whoever need them to see. That's all possible.
So, as you said, you've been involved with CIDM for a while, and I've been at conferences for a long time. And every time I hear a presentation about HyperSTE, I'm like going, how come everybody that's translating content isn't using it? So what are some of the barriers that managers have in trying to get a tool like this approved? Why isn't it a no-brainer essentially for everybody to be using HyperSTE?
Well, I mean, the no-brainer would be in what translation process you have in place, meaning that if you are like, still a lot of people in companies in Europe are, for instance, still doing is writing the source language in the native local language, like German, French, Finnish, even. And that's already a first thing that you have to look after. And it could also very well be that the reason, and we've asked, of course, these questions, but for instance, in a country like France, you simply do not have a lot of French writers that can write directly into English, and then also being able to do it well. The same goes in, for instance, a country like China, where a lot of products these days are coming from. It's written in Chinese and then translated to English. And so what people then want to do is then use HyperST in the translation process, but only use it on the English. Okay, so that's fine, and it's going to create clarity, but it's going to not be coming from the source, which was Chinese. And so it could interpret so let's say in Chinese, you write it in a certain way and it could mean A or B because it's ambiguous. Now we write it in English, we write it in simplified English. Now, because we don't have a choice, we have to either say A or B. The translator or the writer assumed that it was A, right? So that is now standardized, but it was standardized in the wrong way because the source was actually having a different meaning. So in other words, it's a no-brainer, but you also have to look at your translation process. You have to, it shines at its best if you write it direct, if your source language is English to start with. Then this is an absolute no-brainer. But there are a lot of companies out there in the world, countries like Japan, China, European countries, that still write in their native languages. And then the problem with those languages is that there's no standard like simplified English for those languages. There is no simplified Chinese. Well, there is, but it's a spoken language and not for technical communication. So, yeah.
That's interesting. I didn't even think about that. So, but here in where people are writing in English as their source, what's the best argument other than the things that you said at the very beginning to try to convince management they should invest in this tool? Do you have some ROI studies for people?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually do, and it's complimentary. We offer free. We can do that for CIDM members, of course. So if you're a CIDM member, I assume all of you are, then we can do a free business case analysis. And what that means is you provide us with some sample content and say, okay, Barry, how good or how bad is this? what are our potential cost savings? And then we would ask the simple questions like, how many languages do you translate to, if any at all? You know, how many people do you have on staff? Do you have a style guide in place? And those types of questions. And then we would not just run it through HyperSTE, we would also rewrite it. So we would create a report that would show you, here it is, this is how good or how bad you're doing, these are the consistencies, these are the words that you're using, these are the words that you should not be using for these reasons. For instance, we find the word should a lot. Now, from an English or American or even British perspective, the word should is used to be polite about, hey, you should be pushing this button, you know, because you want to be nice about it, right? Where the end user in, for instance, in Asian cultures can look at the word should and translate that in his mind as, oh, I have a choice. I could do it or not do it. So where the source writer was trying to be polite, the message will actually come across completely different. And you have to reckon with that. But anyway, we do these free business case analysis for you, and we would do some rewriting with HyperSTE. We would present the report, we would present some of the rewriting, and usually we do a couple of pages, and you can see 6 pages being reduced to 3 or 4, being much more structured, being much more straightforward, and it will facilitate data too, you know. But that's the thing. The end of the day, your customer is not going to care that you have a simplified English being used, or that you use HyperSTE, or that you have a content management system in place, or that you use data, or any of those things. They're not going to care. What they're going to care is the information that they were looking for. Was it easy to find? Was it easy to understand? Were they able to look it up on their cell phones? All of those things, so that they can solve their particular need as fast and reliable as possible. That's the only thing that they care about. But in order to get there, yes, we should be using simplified English. We should be using data. We should be using tools and whatnot.
Great answer. All right. Any other questions for Barry, or discussions or comments, or anything you wanted to know about beer? No, I'm just kidding. He'd talk about that too.
Yeah, I can. Well, we talk about this and during these conferences, and maybe for those who don't know, I'm technology director at Etteplan, but in my spare time, I own a microbrewery. So I think, was it at the last Convex that we did a brew session where I explained where hops come from and how you can create lagers versus stouts and whatnot. Yeah.
Yep. I was being funny, but it gets you a way to get to know Barry a little bit. So
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. All right. Of course, usually when I say I think we'll wrap up, then 3 or 4 questions come in. But yeah, so we won't drop off just yet. But any other questions for Barry, or any comments? I'm just curious. We don't have a huge group right now. People have dropped off, but if you can find your show of hands, let's do a quick show of hands of people that are considering Hyper or STE in general, whether they use HyperSTE, but are writing for simplified technical English. How many people are doing that?
Yeah, and as you asked that question, a question that we actually get quite often is, hey, simplified English, isn't that an aerospace and defense standard? And that's not for us, because we're not in aerospace and defense. I would say that currently, in overdoing close to 20 years of implementations, I would say that 70% currently of companies that we help out with are not aerospace and defense. So what we do with Simplified English, and to be honest, if you mirror Simplified English with the Microsoft Style Guide, with the Chicago Manual of Style, and you look at the rules that are aimed at creating clarity, then I would say that there's an overlap of 80 to 85%. So whenever these different style guides were created over the last couple of decades, they were not trying to reinvent the wheel, and they were simply looking at one another. How can we create these best practice writing rules? So we call it simplified technical English, but at the end of the day, it's really a lot of these other rules from these other style guides are really in there. So that's one. Two, it's important to mention that you can customize STE to your own needs for creating clarity in writing. We had a company called Electa, they're in the medical healthcare, and they used that standard to create their own baseline. And they then renamed it to EASE, which actually stands for Electa Approved Standardized English.
Oh, interesting.
So that's something that you need to be aware of, because a lot of times, or more times than we would like to admit, simplified English is regarded as a oh, it's too strict, or it's airspace and defense, and we're not. And last 3 weeks ago, issue 8 from the STE spec came out, and they're no longer called airspace and defense. It's just for technical information in general. A lot of the writing rules, a lot of the words that are being used have really been driven away from, because the people that wrote the standards have also realized in recent years that the spec is being used more and more outside aerospace and defense, and they need to cater to that. And so the latest issue, which is a free request, so you can go to the website of ASD, I think it's ASD-STE100.org. Otherwise, you do a Google search on it, but you can request a copy of this, and it's completely free. It's a couple thousand pages actually, but then you have it. Studying this book is also not going to get you there. You're still going to need a tool that is going to help you enforce it.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And what did the hands do?
Well, maybe I needed to rephrase it. I said how many people were considering it. I didn't ask how many were using it. And so it was about 10% were considering, for the people that are paying attention, right?
Yep.
So I don't know if anybody want to do another show of hands. I cleared it to say that are currently using simplified technical English. I'm like, we don't know necessarily if people have stepped away, because it looks no hands have gone up now. So that's interesting.
Well, my last question is, has everyone been happy with this presentation? Was it informative? Was it as educational? And hopefully most of the hands will go up. Otherwise, I did a bad job.
Yeah. Yep. We've got them going up. Perfect.
Great. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
My goal has been achieved.
And hopefully they learned something and had a little fun in between. So thank you, Barry. I look forward to, I thought I was going to sneeze, seeing you again virtually in September, if not before. So take care and enjoy getting the rest of the house straightened out there.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.